Good evening, people. Welcome to Auld. Tonight we're joined by Iain Lawson, former consul for Estonia and blogger of the Youth for Scotland blog, which has been making quite a lot of headlines and waves over the past couple of months. Welcome to the show, Iain.
Thanks very much.
Welcome, Iain. Iain, I don't think I've ever met a consul, even an honorary one. How on earth did Iain Lawson from Paisley, as I understand it, get involved with Estonia?
Well, it's a story of the Tartan Army. There was a group of us in the SNP who every year would go to one, perhaps two Scotland away matches. The idea was it was a boys' week. If I'm honest, 90 minutes of football quite often spoiled an otherwise enjoyable week, but that's the price you pay being a Scotland supporter. So anyway, the rules that we had was if Scotland was drawn in a section where none of us had been before, then that was where we were going to go. That would be one of the games. So we were sitting in a pub, Chris McLean, that used to be the press officer of the Scottish National Party, myself, an ex-councillor, David Coots, an ordinary member, a chap called Maitland Thompson, and we were watching the live draw, and of course popped Estonia. So that was, the decision was made, we're going to Estonia. We then had a discussion about where we thought Estonia was. And eventually we sent Chris out, who came back with an atlas that he'd bought in a newsagent, and we spotted it. It was just across the water from Finland. So we thought, okay, well, we can get to Finland, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem, because we'd already checked if there was any air routes to Estonia from Scotland, and at the time there was none. So we eventually came up, we'll go via Finland. So Chris, being the press officer, he knew all about the newspapers and he knew what special offers were on. And he remembered that the Daily Telegraph had been doing a 2-for-1 offer with KLM. So we checked whether KLM could get us to Helsinki, and sure enough it could. But the problem was the competition date, while it was still open, it was now after the papers were getting printed with the coupons. But Chris came up with a solution, and we wrote to the back circulation department and bought some old copies that were within the qualifying dates, cut out the coupons and sent it off to KLM. So we ended up getting 2-for-1 offers, and we flew initially from Glasgow or Edinburgh to Amsterdam, and then Amsterdam to Helsinki. And one of the group that was coming with us was a guy who owned a whole series of nightclubs and pubs all down the east coast of Scotland. And he said, well, leave the accommodation to me. I'll speak to Finlandia Vodka, because he was the biggest purchaser of Finlandia Vodka in Scotland, he had been told. He says, I'll get them to put us up for the night in Helsinki. So sure enough, he contacted him, no problem at all. They put us up in the Hotel Intercontinental. The sales director was going to come and meet us, take us out for a day and night on the town before we got the ferry the next day over to Estonia. So we're in this pub in the lounge bar where we've agreed to meet this sales director. And what had happened was at the last minute, this chap couldn't come. So he just sent a message saying, just one of you say you work for me or whatever it happens to be, and apologise for me not being there, it'll be okay. So we're sitting discussing who's going to say they worked for this guy. None of us knew anything about his business. And it was very, very funny. We were all laughing, speaking out loud. The whole bar, huge bar, was empty, bar this young woman of about maybe 30 years of age, sitting some distance away. So after all this hilarity, we were saying, no, I can't do it, it's too dishonest, I'll get caught, no, can't do it. This woman in absolutely perfect English stood up and said, well, I'm glad you got that sorted out. I'm the sales director of Finlandia. So we're looking for oxygen masks because we've all been staying in this hugely expensive hotel, you know, putting everything on their bill. But anyway, it turned out great. She had put her notice in and she was leaving to get married and she was leaving the company. She was just looking for a good time, which of course we then went on together. So the next day we got on the hydrofoil to go across to Tallinn. And one of us went to the Bureau de Change in the hydrofoil and handed over, I think it was a £50 note. And he got this pile of notes, you know, about 6 or 7 inches high, all in different notes. So we thought, well, this is going to be interesting, you know, if you get that for 50 quid. So anyway, we got there and we were staying in the Inn Tourist Hotel, which if anybody knows anything about the Soviet Union, the Inn Tourist Hotel was always the best hotel. It was as close to the West as you could possibly get. And the idea was you were supposed to stay there and think everything there was just as good as it was in Paris or wherever it happened to be. So anyway, we stayed there. We took the whole 17th floor of this giant skyscraper hotel. And I got up in the morning and went down for breakfast. And we'd been out quite late the night before. So it was after the breakfast period for the hotel had closed. And the waitress said to me, "I'm sorry, Mr. Lawson, you're going to have to pay for your breakfast." I said, "No problem with that, you know." So I went in, I ordered 2 boiled eggs, 2 slices of toast and a cup of tea. And she came back with the bill and it was 7 pence. So I got on the lift after my breakfast, knocked at the door and said, "Listen, lads, it's not absolutely crucial. We make breakfast every morning." You know, so that was, I mean, the Tartan Army is made up of people of varying financial abilities. But here we'd all landed in a country where it was 20 pence for a vodka and orange. It was 50 pence for a bottle of champagne. So the entire Tartan Army were millionaires for a week. And it was also, I mean, how lucky can you be if you're Estonia? You've just got your independence. This is your first World Cup tournament and your first home game, you draw the Tartan Army. This had previously been quite a closed society. They didn't have many foreign guests and they certainly had nothing like the Tartan Army arriving in their doorstep. So it was a most enjoyable week. The weather was stunningly good. It was the first week of May, I'll never forget it. And we all had a whale of a time, absolute whale of a time. Now, this isn't the game that didn't happen because of the floodlights. This was the original game. And there was about 500 Tartan Army fans there. That was all that was there. But we took over the city centre and, you know, we were buying crates, absolute crates of champagne. Crates of champagne became the tables, became the chairs. We bought glasses, and as people were coming out, we were inviting all the Estonians to come and have some champagne with us. So we were very, very popular visitors, and it created some really good fun. So, I mean, that was how I got to Estonia. While I was there, I decided, you know, this is a country that could really go somewhere, you know, and we're here right at the right time before anything takes off. So I thought, well, I'll maybe start a business here. David Coots, he decided to open bars. I did a thing with some trousers. It was literally like Del Boy, you know, we were bringing stuff. There was very little in the shops. We were bringing stuff from Britain across, driving over in lorries and selling it very, very quickly. I mean, I once sold 4,500 pairs of trousers in 4 days. That gives you an idea of the sort of what we were doing. Anyway, to cut a long story short, all the time I was doing this, I was negotiating with the government to take over the state pest control, because everything in Estonia at the time was owned and controlled by the state. So it took a while, but I eventually managed to get them to agree to let me take it over. Interestingly enough, through their ambition to join the European Union, because the European Union had given them some money for them to rewrite all their laws, food hygiene laws and all the rest of it. And they'd employed a Danish agency that had made a bit of a mess of it when they'd rewritten them and sent them all off to Brussels. Brussels put them in the bin And by this time, Estonia had used up most of the money paying them. And the people I was negotiating with about the pest control were responsible for this. And they happened to mention to me they had this problem. And I had a friend that was part of a team of 7 in the UK that rewrote all Britain's food laws when Britain joined the EU. So I said, well, leave it with me, I'll see what I can do. So I phoned, and he was working for the Scottish office at the time, and I got them to agree to second them from the Scottish office to work for my company, and then I gifted that to the Estonian, I gifted them to the Estonian government, and he wrote all their food laws. And of course, when they sent them to Brussels, he was known by all the people in Brussels that were responsible for it, and they just ticked it off, and that was the whole problem solved. And it was, I mean, I don't charge the Estonian government for any of this, but it was very useful in so much as it convinced them, well, we should really have this guy involved running the pest control here, because he's already been exceptionally helpful. Right. Now, by this time, Chris McLean had got romantically involved. He married an Estonian girl, and very interesting. Those are people that are listening to this that know Chris. He was quite a skilled linguist before he went there, but Estonian's one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn. But when Chris got married, he basically said to his wife she wasn't to speak to him in any other language other than Estonian for the first 6 months, so he could learn the language. And Chris speaks it fluently, completely fluently now. And he still lives in Estonia, so it's very much his first language these days. But I had Chris sitting alongside me when I was negotiating with the government. And it was quite interesting because, of course, they just automatically presumed that nobody from Scotland could speak Estonian, you know, and we never told them we could either, you know. But they were having I'd ask an awkward question and they'd speak to each other in Estonian, working out what the best answer would be in front of us, not realising that Chris was understanding every word that they were saying. But anyway, the long and short of it was that was what got me involved with the Estonian government. And then eventually, Estonia very quickly worked out, you know, we're not going to be able to put embassies and consulates everywhere in the world that we want to do it, but we want to have representation as widely as possible, as quickly as possible. So when the Scottish Parliament was created, they obviously wanted to have a direct link with Scotland, and they looked at, you know, who it could possibly be. And here was I, perfectly positioned by sheer luck, with a business in Estonia, employing Estonians, having helped them with their EU application, this, that, and the other. So they came and asked me, would I be happy to do it? And of course I was, because it was a good opportunity. I mean, I was like you, I'd never met a consul before, but the main responsibilities of it were basically to accompany Estonian government ministers when they came to Scotland, and you know, take them to meet government ministers here and the like, and also to issue passports and renew passports for all the Estonians who live in Scotland.
Iain, for a lot of people that are watching this, like me, they will not know a lot about Estonia. So can I ask you some simple basic questions? My understanding, the population is not huge. What kind of
1.35 million. 1.35 million.
Who are all native Estonian, or is there a Russian presence there from when Russia were involved?
Yeah. They tried to Russify Estonia, you know, and I mean, huge numbers, tens and tens of thousands of Estonians were deported out of Estonia during Stalin's time, and basically they would come along and say, 48 hours time, you have to be at the railway station, you're allowed to take one suitcase. And as you were going out, Russian families were being brought in to take over your house, take over your job, whatever it happened to be at that stage. And that went on for a long period. So, I mean, if you go to the capital, Tallinn, there's probably 35 to 40% of the population are ethnic Russians. You know,
how's that played out since they've become independent?
well, I was very concerned because, I mean, I was there 92 and they only got their independence in 91, and I was thinking, you know, that could be a problem. And there was definitely attempts at the time by Russia to try and stir up the ethnic Russian population. They were obviously opposed to Estonia becoming independent. But, you know, very quickly, thanks to the government, first government was an exceptional government. And they did a lot of very, very clever things very, very quickly. And it soon became clear to everyone living in Estonia, whether you be an ethnic Russian or an Estonian, that very shortly your living standards were going to be much higher in Estonia than they would be in Russia. And this eventually culminated with the main Russian-speaking newspaper holding a poll of its readers, where it basically asked them, given the choice, would you rather stay in Estonia or would you like to go back to Russia? And over 90% of the ethnic Russians in Estonia said they wanted to stay. And that killed all attempts from then on to try and build up and stir up racial problems. So there hasn't been really anything terribly serious. But the potential was there for that. What killed it was the rising living standards.
Right.
And if there's a lesson for us to learn here in Scotland about A, how we get our independence, and then B, what we do with it. The Estonians were very, very clever. They weren't allowed in Soviet times to, you know, discuss independence. You could go to jail for 22 months for handing out independence leaflets. But they set up organisations which they called heritage organisations. And the cover story was that these were groups that were going to examine Estonian history. But they were in fact policy-making groups. They were discussion groups about A, how do we win our independence, and B, once we've got it, what do we do with it? And they came up with a lot of very, very innovative. I don't know if you remember hearing about the Baltic chain. That was one of the most remarkable. I mean, Estonia is 45,000 square kilometres. It's got a population 1.3, of which about a third of the population live in Tallinn. So you've got a huge area with a very sparse population, just like the Scottish Highlands, really, over most of the rest of the country. And they held hands from the sea, from Tallinn, all the way through, right down into Latvia, right across Latvia, right down to Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. 600 kilometres. And they got the people out to hold hands as a protest demanding independence. Quite remarkable. I mean, huge numbers. And they had to get them and ship them from the capital into these rural areas and have them all there at the right time, ready to go, with Soviet helicopters flying up above, trying to find gaps that they could fill to discredit the whole thing. And they found none. In some of the city areas, if you watch the film, it's 30, 40, 50 people deep. Yeah. The number of folk been out wanting to take part in it. Absolute determination. They were refused a referendum, by the way, and that was their response to it. Their response was to get out in the streets.
Go on, Dave.
We were going to do something like that, like along the border here, like last year. Before all the COVID thing hit. But basically, having sat and worked, we were going to need 80,000 people to go, like, from the Solway to the Tweed. And with that, the problem we had is that road up the borders is almost impossible. And so even if you managed to get the 80,000 people, which would have been possible, it would have been the logistics actually getting them along that road. Because there's only 3 sort of main towns, and there are no even very big ones on that road. So even with buses, we wouldn't be able to get down to get the people to the places, and we eventually had to give it up. But the Baltic chain was amazing. How they keep saying to us that how can we break up a union 300 years with the UK? Basically, Estonia was part of the Soviet Union. It wasn't for 300 years, but it was probably over 40. And yet they managed to get their independence and be completely independent within 366 days.
Well, that's what frustrates me, what our approach to all this. I mean, let me just give you one example. You know, you've heard about the Growth Commission over here and about how we need a central bank and all the rest of it. Estonia set up its central bank before it became independent, 8 months before. And 8 months after independence, it launched its new currency. 8 months, you know. So all these people that talk about all these difficulties, you know, it's all false. It's completely false. Let me tell you, when they joined the euro, this is a good lesson for Scotland. I was there, I was running a business. Let me tell you the level of disruption for me from moving from the Estonian kroon to the euro. For 2 weeks, they allowed the euro and the kroon to operate in all shops and banks. All contracts were transferred legally from kroons to the equivalent rate of the euro. At the end of that 2 weeks, that was the end of it. You could have that 2 weeks, you could take every kroon you had down to the bank and it would be transferred into euros, as was your bank balance. If even today, if you suddenly discovered under your granny's mattress hundreds of thousands of kroons, you could take them down to the bank and they would be exchanged for euros at the exact same rate as it is today. You know,
it's one of the reasons I wanted you on, Iain, because without getting into detail, everything you've just said is exactly what's in my mind. Currency is not the problem it seems to be. We've got it into our heads that it is. There are institutions we need. We need a central bank. We need a conduct authority to make sure people are protected from any misdealings. But the actual problems are not, they're all easily solved.
Absolutely. Well, the biggest problem of having your own currency is being able to earn sufficient foreign currency to make it secure. Now, Scotland has got the world's most successful export called whisky. Right? We don't have any problem earning foreign currency. We've got oil fields that are priced in dollars. We have no problem getting money in foreign currency. So, I mean, the problem, if Scotland was to have a problem with its own currency, the chances are it would be too strong. And we would probably have to buy some English money just to devalue our level of reserves. You know, I mean, if it was up to me, what would we do with the Scottish pound? Well, I would introduce it by launching it against a basket of 3 currencies. I would use the dollar, because we've got oil wealth that's priced in dollars. That would be easy to do. I would have the pound, because we trade a lot with England, and that's sensible to make as least difference as possible, and also the euro. So I would have these 3 currencies, and I would peg the Scots pound to the average of these 3 currencies and keep it pegged at that until such times as we decide what we're going to do. I mean, eventually we would presumably unplug it and just let it float, having been an established currency for long enough to build up credibility and the reserves. But it's nothing like the problem. It's our opponents that always go on about currency because they know it's complicated or potentially complicated. But let me tell you a story about that. In the 2014 referendum, the BBC made the mistake of inviting me on to a programme to discuss it. And within about 2 minutes of being on this programme, I had absolutely savaged the Tory to the point he was calling for surrender. He was just wanting to get out of the studio. That was the end of it. Now, from that moment on, I get loads and loads of folk that were listening to it contacting me saying, that was fantastic. That was so simple. Everybody understood what you were saying. And the Tory was killed, We'll have to have more of that. The BBC never let me near another studio for the remainder of the 2014 campaign because of the humiliation I gave to that guy it was on as their expert. So, I mean, we need to let, on these complex issues, keep our message simple. Speak at the level that ordinary people, you don't need to have some top economist going in and speaking about all the theories, because while it maybe sounds good to people that are expert, it means absolutely nothing. It's gobbledygook to the average person in the street. They just want to know what's going to happen to my pound, how much is it going to be worth, how do I get this other currency without losing out in the deal. Now, you know, if you take the history of Better Together in 2014, where they were telling us we were much safer with this hugely successful pound. I mean, our starting point for the currency should be taken what the international trading rates of the pound were on the 18th of September 2014 and what they are today. You know, and the pound's down about 30%, you know, so you know, that's a good start from our argument that you believed this last time. We stuck with them. Here's what they've done to us in the last 6 years.
It's a subject I'm interested in, Iain, and I follow what Commonweal have said about it.
Yep.
Andy Anderson. At the moment, I would suggest most people are watching Tim Rideout.
Yep.
And just, I want to make this comment as a specific comment. One of the suggestions that Tim Rideout has made, and I think it could be very important when you're talking at a level people understand. He has made the comment that if pensioners are worried that there could be a drop in the value of the Scottish pound and they're getting paid in the, what would be our UK pound, he has said, let's give them a guarantee that Scotland will make up any difference. They can keep any gain they get if the Scottish pound becomes stronger, but if for any reason it was weaker, we would guarantee it. And that's the kind of simple message that will convince people, I'm not taking a risk, I'm actually going to benefit from the change to independence.
Absolutely. I mean, what we've got to get across to people is that change is not something that's threatening or a danger. Change is opportunity. And that's the way it was presented in Estonia. When they got their independence, they had very set ideas what they needed to do. Now, let me tell you, they didn't go borrowing money. The International Monetary Fund turned up and offered them all sorts of cash. They said, no, we don't want it. We have policies that will bring in the investment we need to get our economy on the go. And that's exactly what they did. And that's why if you go away and look now at the EU figures, the country with the lowest debt by a mile with miles is Estonia. In fact, if you take the money that Estonia has had to put into the EU as part of guarantee schemes that the EU run, Estonia has zero debt. The EU owe them money rather than the other way. And yet they've transformed their country, transformed it. When I went there, if you scraped the paint off every building in the centre of Tallinn, it wouldn't have filled a 1 gallon tin of Dulux, you know. But you go there now, it's absolutely pristine. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site that transformed their economy out of all recognition to what it was. The average wage when I went there was $40 US a month when I went there in 92, you know, and now they're just past Portugal in terms of GDP. They're on the way up massively. It's the most digitally advanced country in the whole of the world. Definitely in Europe, probably the whole world. I mean,
I was going to come on to digitalisation and the way they've gone about that, Iain. But before you get there, we were talking earlier on that Scotland has its ability to trade worldwide, whisky, food, whatever. What is the background to Estonia? What did they start promoting to try and generate their economic potential?
Well, I mean, you could talk, there's a whole lot of different things you could pick up, but I think the cleverest was, obviously the Soviet Union, they took over everyone's property. So they had a huge job right at the beginning to decide who owned each property in Estonia and to give it back to the rightful owners. So they had a period of 3 years where you weren't allowed to sell any property you were living in or whatever until such times as it was established that you had the right to own it. And basically they went through this exercise for 3 years, then everyone got the property they were entitled to if they could prove that they'd actually owned it before the Soviets took over. Then after that, there was a voucher scheme. You could use it to move house or do whatever you wanted at that point. And that applied to the whole country, bar the centre of Tallinn. Because the centre of Tallinn is a completely walled city, going back to the 13th century, because they recognised that if they could bring that up to the standard that it was originally, it would be a huge tourist draw, and it would be a big earner of foreign currency, particularly coming from their rich neighbours, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland. So they recognised that they had to do that. So whereas everywhere else in the country, you got your property back, if your property was in the old town area, you had to be able to demonstrate you had the money available to instantly renovate it to the standard that they wanted them to have. Now, of course, most of the people that got their properties back didn't have that. So that was a big opportunity, which sadly we missed out on, but it was a huge opportunity to the Swedes, the Finns and others, because they all came along and provided the capital in return for taking a slice of the building, you know, as their return for doing this. And of course,
was all that government generated thinking, or was
that was government generated thinking, but the arrangements between where the money came from, that was left to the house owners to find their joint partner, etc. With it. But I mean, it was all done legally, and there was no real problem with it. I mean, usually you would find that the investor would get something like 30 or 40% of the value of the property in return for doing the renovation. Very good business for them, because at the time, obviously the wages were much lower and Estonia's got a lot of skilled trade. So it wasn't that expensive to do. But of course, as the Estonian economy took off, as in, you know, it became a UNESCO World Heritage Site and all the rest of it, these buildings have soared in value. So very, very good investment for those.
They cut capital against it. They cut capital against tax to 10%, eh?
Well, Estonia's got very, very simple taxes. I mean, basically, they operate a flat tax system. So it's a straight 20%. Whatever you make, that's what you pay. Now, I used to be against flat tax, but when I look at the tax system over here in Britain, where if you've got enough money and you've got good accountants, you probably end up paying nothing. Whereas in Estonia, every company, it doesn't matter whether you're Nokia or some wee two-man plumber's outfit, whatever money you make, whatever profit you make, 20% of it goes to the government. I think the British government would love to get 20% of the profits of a lot of the companies that operate in Britain. So, and of course, if you are collecting the tax from all these companies that would normally escape it, then the tax need from the rest of the community is much lower, and the taxes are much lower for that reason. I mean, they've got a lot of clever tax things. It's worth telling you this one, because if this one had been in operation in Scotland in the 70s, we would still have an electronics industry worth talking about, because what Estonia did was they've got 0% tax and corporation tax. Yep. So in other words, if you make money as your company and you don't take it out, you leave it in the company, you don't pay any tax in it. You only pay tax if you take the money out of the company. Now, what does that do? Well, it creates an incentive for companies that are doing well, making money, to stay in the country, to do something else in the country, because you're allowed to spend it on another company in the country as long as it's within Estonia's national borders. So what you get is some of the big companies deciding that they would like to take a share in some of their supplier companies. Mm. And of course, the minute they do that, they make the supplier company much more efficient because it's more modern equipment, and they in turn find other people to supply rather than just this one. And everybody's happy. You get this circle of investment, you know. So they found all the ways to get money to come in And a lot of, even if you look today, you know, Estonia's went through the 90s and the early 2000s. I've not looked at the figures recently, but it was always getting the highest level of foreign direct investment of all the Eastern European countries. And the bulk of that was coming from companies that were already there, that were successfully making money and then reinvesting it in their economy. Now, if you think of the electronics industry that we had here in the 70s, all these companies, you know, Motorola, East Kilbride, and all the rest, and Sun Microsystems, all of them. If we had that system here, then I believe we would have ended up with the research and development because of our high standards of education here, where we could have provided that expertise. If we'd have given them the tax incentive to invest more money and to host these things here, then they would still be here, because the minute you get companies investing in research and development, they're really investing in people. And you can't be guaranteed that people will move when you want to move. So that's the secret. If you can get that to happen, then you move on your economy to a new level. And Estonia has been quite successful at doing that.
I took you off the digitisation, but if Estonia is known for anything at the moment, Iain, above all else, will be its approach to using digital.
I mean, they were very clever. You only get one opportunity when you become independent. And, you know, they were facing a blank sheet of paper. And the average age of the first Estonian cabinet, by the way, after independence, was 34 years of age. And the main qualification to be in that cabinet was never to have been in one before. I mean, the Estonians decided when they became independent, they wanted no truck with communism, state anything. They just wanted to have a free economy, join the Western world and go on with it. So they decided not to look at what the West had. What they did was they looked and said, where does the West want to go? Right, we'll get there first. So, for instance, there's no checks, not been checks in the banking system ever. You know, I mean, it's all electronic. Everything was electronic from day one. You know, really clever use. So, I mean, let me give you some examples, practical everyday examples. They say in Estonia, by the way, you only need to leave the house twice in life. Once to get married and the second time when you die. The rest of the time you can actually live in the house, because every single aspect of public life in Estonia is online. Every government department. Say, for instance, you move house. You can go on with your citizen's entitlement card, type in the code, put in your new address, put in your old address. The system instantly goes, checks with every government department, all the utility companies everywhere. If they find a file, they update it with your new address instantaneously. You've not had to see MD, you've not had to phone MD, you haven't had to do anything. Take a parent at school. Your child's at school. You can go online and check every bit of your child's work. You can see the marking, you can see the teacher's comments. There's no way the child can say, I can't do my homework tonight, I forgot to bring my book home. Every school book is online, you know, so you can access it, because the Estonians took the view, largely because of the geography, that, you know, they couldn't possibly build libraries in every little town and village and hamlet. So the big equaliser would be the internet, and they would make sure that every child had a connection to the internet for as long as they were in education. And then they built the whole system round doing that. So every child, no matter where you lived, had equal opportunity to get the information you required. You know, so, you know, very clever. I've been able to park my car in Estonia since about 1995 electronically. The whole country's divided into four groups. When you park in a parking space, you just dial in. You've got a membership for the parking. You just dial in, say how long you want to stay, and book it. And if you haven't cancelled your parking, when it's got 10 minutes to go, they contact you on your phone and say, would you like to top up? And you can top up in 10-minute segments without leaving whatever meeting you're in or whatever until you get back to the car and then eventually cancel your parking at that particular point. You can use your phone. This is coming here, by the way. You can use your phone as a credit card. Basically, you can go in anywhere, do your shopping, and when you get to the checkout, you just put in the amount, and it sends it to your telephone company, and they send back to the till confirming that it's been paid, and that's it. And because they do that, they know what your shopping habits are, so they use GPS. So while you're going down an aisle, they can send to you and you only special offers on goods that you bought previously, and only you can get the special offer. You know, so if you bought a bottle of Bell's whiskey, you buy one every month, and you haven't bought it for the last couple of months. When you're passing the Bell's whiskey, it sends you a message that gives you, and you only have maybe a 10% discount or whatever on it. You know, so quite remarkable. You know, and just I mean that's just some simple examples, but there's countless examples. You can do literally anything, speak to literally anyone, you know, through this system. And I mean, one of the reasons for it is they had a President Auld, who spent his life promoting Estonian digital technology. I mean, they've got other countries buying. I mean, these rich, knowledgeable countries next door, they're all buying Estonian software to introduce the same systems into their country. An Estonian going on holiday, say to Spain, falls and has an accident. He goes to hospital. He can give the hospital access to his health records instantly just with this card, and it can download onto the hospital computer. There's the whole guy's history instantaneously. Just like that. I mean, it's quite remarkable what they can do.
Dave,
I mean, the court, they've got they've got a paperless parliament. There is no paper in the parliament, none. You know, the cabinet meet online. You know, any Estonian citizen can send in amendments to government bills, and believe it or not, they get printed out in the government, in the Prime Minister's office. These amendments, any Estonian citizen, and they've got some great examples. If you go and look at this, of, you know, some wee ordinary guy somewhere remotely in Estonia who's known more than whoever's been writing the legislation and sent in amendments which have been hugely successful. And they keep a board of all the examples of this, where this open democracy, you know, where anyone can contribute. Now, I'm not saying the Prime Minister sees these, but they do go opened in his office. And, you know, the records show that quite a number of them have been very successful, you know, been written by ordinary citizens. So, you know, it's really quite exciting to see these things.
Dave sent me a link, which I apologise I haven't read, but there's a big conference of some kind coming up. Dave, do you know what that was about?
It's a Estonian Unicorns Conference, I believe they call it. They're sort of big, big sort of multinationals, or no multinational yet, they're basically started out in Estonia and since played out. And I believe they've got some tie-in with eBay. No eBay itself, but I can't remember exactly how. But basically,
it might come through. I mean, it was Estonia's proudest creation since independence is probably Skype. Skype was the I think eBay bought Skype, didn't they? I think, you know. So I mean, other Estonian companies have been hugely successful. Ones like TransferWise, which is a joint venture between Estonian business people and London, you know, which has been very, very successful. I use it all the time. If you're ever want to transfer money abroad, TransferWise is the people to use. It's a lot cheaper than the banks, you know. So they're very innovative.
Do they worry at all about the fact that they are so dependent? They're using it as a positive. I don't want to take away from that, but The negative would be, are they worried at all about interference on the fact that they're so dependent on the digital world?
Well, they shouldn't be, because, I mean, so advanced are Estonians at this that the NATO Cyber Defence Centre is situated in Tallinn, because they can't get any better technical experts than the Estonians. You know, when you go to school in Estonian primary school, you're taught code, you know. Yeah, you get primary school kids writing their own programs, complicated programs, you know. So, you know, the whole country's basically digitalized. Everyone of all ages, you know, is involved in it. And, you know, the level of knowledge is pretty much exceptional. You know, they're not sitting in their laurels. And I mean, why should they? Because, I mean, a lot of folk don't know anything about, you know, Estonia, but let me just tell you a wee bit about their past. I mean, before the Second World War and the Russians took over, they had a higher standard of living than Denmark or Finland, you know? And you only need to go to Tallinn and you see the quality of the buildings. Okay, they'd been run down during Soviet times, but, you know, there was obvious wealth. It was a Hanseatic League city, Tallinn, part of the Hanseatic League. So, you know, they have, they're only getting rejoining the Western economy, but there's no reason why they shouldn't be hugely successful in the future. I mean, the one thing I introduced about 300 Scottish companies in my time when I was consul to Estonia. And the one thing I always told them was, for goodness sake, before you go there, learn something about the country. Because when you get there, they know about you. They'll tell you about the Baltic traders coming out of cities like Dundee and down the east coast of Scotland. They'll tell you, you know. So it's a good idea for you to know about that before you go there. And here's an interesting story. When I first got appointed, I got a letter from the First Minister of Scotland, Jack McConnell at the time. And in it, he said, here's something, Iain, which I think you'll find of interest. And it was from the Scottish Archives. And basically what it was a recording of the fact that after the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, the Scots army had destroyed the crops in advance of the English army coming north. And after the victory, the food wasn't there to be harvested because of that action. And there was widespread starvation in Scotland at the time. And they had to somehow survive that winter until and through to the following summer, when they could harvest whatever new crops they put in. And the food supplies that came and saved Scotland came from Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania by ship. So there's a wee bit of Scottish history, and it shows you how far back Scotland and Estonia goes. There's an Estonian city called Narva, which is right on the border with Russia. And in the 18th century, there was about 1,700 Scots lived there, who were the families of the Scottish Baltic Fleet, right, who would be taken there to summer in Estonia, and they would be picked up by their family ships and brought back to Scotland, you know, when the Estonian winter began to threaten, because it's a very severe winter. So, I mean, there's links going back long, long ways. You know, the Battle of Rakvere was a battle which involved a lot of Scots mercenaries fighting the Russians. Basically, they were part of the Swedish army at the time. And that's quite a sad story. I always, when I want to upset Estonians, remind them of that, because there was about 300 Scots in the army, and they were mercenaries. And after they defeated the Russians, they were assassinated by the Estonians because they didn't have the money to pay them. So it's always a good story to upset the Estonians, tell them that they owe us something.
Just before we started recording, Iain, you confessed that the date of the Burns Supper in Estonia can be manipulated slightly. Can you tell us that story, please?
Yeah, well, we were obviously interested in doing as many business deals as we could when we got there. So one of the most successful and very early on, we met an Estonian drinks company who made their own vodka and gin, but they were wanting to have a whisky. And at the time, whisky was hugely expensive in Estonia, about £10 a bottle, which to Estonians on $40 US, there wasn't a lot of getting sold. So anyway, I did pest control for quite a number of Scots whisky companies here in Scotland, so I knew a lot of them. So I said to the chap, come on over and I'll take you around some of my customers and we'll see if there's a deal to be done. So I took him around a number of them over here, and eventually he decided he wanted to do a deal with William Grant's. So basically, it was great fun. It was great fun, this deal. We had to get a tanker of whisky from Scotland to Estonia, and we couldn't get insurance for it to go into Estonia unless we booked 6 people with machine guns to actually go in this whisky tanker. They don't let you go 7 miles in Estonia, because what we did was we took it to Newcastle and it got the ferry from Newcastle to Gothenburg. We then drove it over to Stockholm and it got the ferry at Stockholm into Tallinn, and this bottling plant was only 7 miles from the port, but no insurance company would touch it unless we could get, guys with machine guns. So we managed to get that and take it over. Anyway, it was a huge success, but basically we wanted to launch it in Estonia, and the secret of this was that they had a very archaic taxation system where the tax was based on alcohol and volume in terms of quantity. So it would cost you the same for a pint of lager as it would for a pint of cask strength whisky. So single-handedly through this move of our deal, we reduced the price of whisky in Estonia from £10 a bottle to £3 a bottle. Which, I mean, there was enough in the first consignment to bottle 250,000 bottles of whisky, and they were sold within about 2 months. Whereas the previous year, there'd only been, I think, 17,000 bottles of whisky sold between Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania together. So being able to get around the tax system and reducing it down to affordable levels was a hugely good move. So I'm so friendly with that company. He's now, it's now finished, and he made a huge success of the whisky and then sold it to the funds and retired, bought himself a castle, and now raises horses.
I want you to tell the story about the Burns supper.
Right, so anyway, this is where this ties in. We wanted to launch the whisky and we wanted an event. So we thought, right, what we'll do is we'll have a Burns supper, and William Grant will provide the whisky and all the rest of it, and we'll fly the haggis in, make a big thing of it, and we'll invite the Prime Minister. So we thought, well, how can we get the Prime Minister to come and get TV coverage? So we had a wee look and we saw that basically moving Burns' birthday just maybe a few weeks, we could hold a Burns supper on the eve of Estonian independence. And that way we could invite the Prime Minister, we could probably get the TV coverage because it'd be the first Burns supper ever in the history of Estonia. And we had pipes and drums there, we done it really well, the whole works. So it was good TV from that point of view. But the idea was that at 10 minutes to midnight, the Prime Minister would be introduced to say a few nice things about Scotland and then toast Estonian independence. And what we hadn't understood was that he would get slightly mixed up, and he actually thought it was Burns' birthday. So we didn't tell him until afterwards that his birthday had been a month before, but it was very good, and it got it got the whisky the level of publicity we were hoping for, you know. So it was another successful do. And I mean, actually, there's now quite a number of burn suppers in Estonia. It started a tradition. There's 3 or 4 every summer, and it's now moved out of just being Tallinn into Haapsalu, which is another city that are now running a Burns weekend, and they have curling on the ice as part of their Burns weekend, as well as having a Burns supper. And the council all wear Estonian tartan.
Is this in February or is it back to January again?
No, the Burns supper's now back in January. It was only made for the one occasion.
Iain, when you're speaking to the people you know in Estonia, they're looking at Scotland and the fact that we're faffing about over independence. Do they ever sit down and say, what the hell are you waiting on? Just do it?
Well, I had a terrible job after 2014 trying to explain it away, because the Estonian newspapers were very interested. I mean, they sent over some journalists, which I took in a little tour. They were staying in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and they wanted to go somewhere rural. So I agreed to pick them up, and I took them down to Inveraray. And I just sat in the pub, the George Hotel, and they went out to go and speak to locals round about. And they came back after about an hour and said, we can't find anybody that's voting no. We need to find some folk for balance. Everyone who spoke to here is voting yes. So I had to, on the way back, I had to drop in at Arica, and I took them into the village inn in Arica, and we found a table that were voting no. But here's the best part of it. The table was the editor of The Sun and his family, right? So that's who the no voters in the Estonian newspapers heard it from first, because we couldn't find anybody else. And that trip, and they left Scotland convinced that it was going to be, 70%, 30, something like that, and they were absolutely distraught when the result came in, as bad as we were, So, the good thing is Estonia and Scotland got on quite well. I mean, there's quite close links between our government and the Estonian government, because I know our government's, looking at some of the things the Estonians have done. I've seen Jean Freeman recently was talking about some of the digital use in the health service, etc. I know our Justice Department have been looking at their court system, which is all, again, no paper involved in it at all. It's all done online. I was at a Scottish Council for Development and Industry dinner. No, it was a meeting, sorry, a big meeting in Edinburgh. I always remember when George Reid was the presiding officer, so it tells you how long ago it was. And I always remember sitting in the audience very proud that George Reid got up and said that he was the presiding officer of the second most modern parliament in Europe. And he was meaning that the Estonians were the number one modern when it came to digital services. So, I've had the president over here from Estonia when I was the honorary consul, the president, had the industry minister, had the minister of population. I took him to the Gaelic school up in Glasgow, and he was hugely impressed by him. I'm just realising that my battery's getting low. You may have lost me there, my battery's getting low.
We lost you for a wee while, Iain. What Dave will do, he'll edit that.
Right,
so
okay.
So that disappears out. So I would suggest we've been running for about just short of an hour.
Right.
So if you just imagine that didn't happen.
Right, okay.
We'll just wind down. I'll thank you, etc. Just however you want to deal with it.
Well, just do that now. That would make sense.
Okay. Dave, that's us just about running for an hour, which is what we try and accomplish. Iain, thanks very, very much for bringing the stories. I think more bringing the inspiration of what can be achieved if you put your mind to it and just decide to do it. Thanks, Iain.
Thanks very much. I hope people enjoyed listening to it, because it is genuinely quite inspirational, and it's been a big driving force in my commitment to independence.
Thanks very much, Iain. I know you've given us a lot of your time today, but I find what you've taught us tonight is there's too much fear about what's going to happen afterwards. And it's good to actually see that it's a harvest ready to be harvested.
We just need to raise our confidence levels. That's what we need to do. Be confident and go for it. That's my message.
Thanks, Iain.
Thanks a lot for coming along, Iain.
Okay. Nice talking to you guys.
Thanks for the decorations.
That's it. Well,
the 12 Heids are not up to standard.
I haven't put my beard on yet.
We'll get you back to see that one.
No worries.
Talk to you later.
Okay, talk to you later, guys. Bye.